is Alana Ell, and I'm the Occupational Therapist for Clearview Public Schools. Today I wanted to take some time to go over with you my favorite intervention for pre-K kiddos, and that is making Play-Doh. I love making and working with Play-Doh because it covers so many domains that are of interest to an occupational therapist. So, for example, working with Play-Doh works on executive functioning skills. It works on visual motor integration skills, eye-hand coordination, crossing midline. It works on spatial awareness, as well as sensory processing. It covers so many skills that we as adults take for granted every day, but are actually really hard for our pre-K kiddos. So I'm going to go over some of these skills as I make the Play-Doh, but first I wanted to speak a little bit about executive functioning skills. And this is because executive functioning issues are most commonly the issue that I deal with in classrooms. And that's because if a child struggles with executive functioning skills, he or she is going to struggle with classroom management skills. So I see a lot of this in the school. And these executive functioning skills are our higher order thinking, like planning, organizing, managing ourselves, controlling emotions, that sort of thing. And when we think about kids, we typically focus on 3 executive functioning skills, and those are working memory, inhibitory control, and flexible or cognitive flexibility, which is a child's ability to switch from task to task or stop a task and start a new task, which for adults seems really simple, but for a child to end one task and then say start cleanup is actually very difficult. And these skills are very difficult because they occur in our frontal lobe. And as you may know, a child's frontal lobe is very underdeveloped, and even in adults doesn't develop till about 25 or 30 years old. So developmental studies show that executive functioning skills change significantly during the pre-K years. And this is why during these years, it's really, really important to give them the appropriate tasks and activities that challenge these skills to help them develop. Without the appropriate activities and tasks, these skills won't develop as well as when we do give them opportunity. So this is where building or making Play-Doh comes into play, because it challenges all of these tasks. And as I make the Play-Doh, I'll talk through some of these skills and how as an adult we take them for granted, but for our pre-K kids or even our school age kids, they're really tricky skills. So for example, I have laid out all of the materials and recipe or ingredients that I need to make the Play-Doh. And this was really simple for me, but this was actually an executive functioning task because I had to use my working memory to keep track of everything I needed. And then when I forgot, I had to shift my attention or use some cognitive flexibility to look back at my instructions to know what I needed and then shift back again to collecting it. And I'm holding these instructions in my head, and as I'm forgetting, again, I'm shifting back and remembering what to do. And all of this is happening very effortlessly and quickly for me. And this is happening in my frontal lobe, but this doesn't happen for our children. And that's why we need to help them practice these skills. One of the ways that this is happening so effortlessly for me is that I'm going through a mental script or an inner speech in my mind. I have an internal dialogue of everything I need to do and everything that I will do in my mind. And I have a list of all these things that need to happen. And it's kind of like an inner voice just going on and telling me what I need to do. And interestingly, our pre-K students don't really have this inner voice, so we have to be that inner voice for them. So one really important thing for us as adults to do is as we're working through this, as I'm collecting the materials, I need to be talking out what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, because that's how children learn to develop this internal inner speech thing. So children develop this by listening to adults do it and then by vocalizing it externally. So we really want to challenge and encourage our kids to also talk about what we're doing, because that speech and that vocalization turns into their inner monologue. And then another important thing during these tasks is to let our children have as much say in planning as possible. So let them pick out what flower bowl. So I have several different sizes of bowls here, and I would pick this bowl to make the Play-Doh because it gives me lots and lots of room. But when I'm working with my kiddos, I try and let them pick, because if they pick, say, this bowl, and we pour a cup of flour into it, and then we want to add water, it's not going to work very well. And I want them to struggle through that because I want them to reflect on that process. And what we're what we're doing there is building spatial awareness and understanding of conservation of mass and concepts like big and small and deep and shallow. And again, talk through this with them to help them develop those language skills, because strong language skills are going to help with that inner speech I was talking about. So I would also encourage you to let them do as much as possible with their hands, because then we're working on visual motor integration. And that's our ability to physically respond to what our visual system is taking in and telling us. And this is a critical skill for handwriting. So asking kids to copy what you're doing challenges their VMI skills. And it requires them to visually process what you just did and make a motor plan based on that information. So while you're doing this, you'll also notice that you're working on eye-hand coordination and fine motor skills. And these are essential to VMI. So I'm gonna start to make the Play-Doh, and I'm gonna go through it quickly because I have the confidence that you guys know how to do this. I found a recipe that doesn't use cream of tartar and doesn't require you to cook it, because I just wanted to use stuff that is readily available around the house. So I am going to take 3/4 cup of water, and be mindful that this is supposed to be hot water. I'm going to pour it into my smaller bowl, actually. And I'm going to add a tablespoon of vegetable oil, which I forgot. I'll be right back. So that was a good example of kind of a lapse in executive functioning skills. I forgot the vegetable oil. And then I'm going to add some lemon juice. And my husband was kind enough to buy me lime juice because I think he thought they were the same thing. So I'm going to add 3 tablespoons of this. And this here, I like to use these little ones because your kids can practice that pinch and squeeze. So you're working on fine motor and you're working on some hand strength there. So we'll do one more. Hopefully this works the same as lemon. And then I like to add some food coloring as well. So I'm going to pick blue. And again, this is a great thing to let your kids do because they got to use that pinch grip, which is great for writing. So I'm going to add lots in because that's fun. And then I also like to add some scents or smells to it because this helps with sensory processing. So I just have some essential oils and I'm going to throw some of that in there. Then I'm going to mix it all together. And I have a nice little blue water. And again, let them do this because right now I'm working on fine motor skills. I'm controlling my shoulder, I'm controlling my elbow, I'm controlling my wrist. I have a nice little lateral tripod grip here. So let them work on this. And then I'm going to take my flour, which I need a cup of. And then I'm going to put it in here. And again, let your children do that because you're working on eye-hand coordination there. And Also some bilateral skills because they have to hold the container. And then I'm going to add my salt, which I need a 1/4 cup of. And again, let them scoop that up. And mix that in there. And then I'm sure lots of you have done this before, but it's really easy. I just slowly add my water to my flour and mix it up. So don't add it all at once. Add some, stir. This is a great shoulder exercise and elbow exercise for them. Requires a lot of control. Add some more. And while you're doing this, you want to encourage them to use both hands. So that's also another skill that's pretty hard for them, is using both hands. It requires both sides of the brain to be working at the same time. So get them using both hands in there. Another thing that is really important that I like for this skill is crossing midline. So that's our ability to take, say, our right hand and reach across to the left side of us. And this is another task that is really tricky for kids because it requires both sides of their brain to talk to each other. And when they're young, the pathways between their two hemispheres are quite weak and they don't have a lot of them. So some children, even at age 3, 4, and 5 sometimes, can't actually cross midline. So try that out with your kids, see if they can cross. And what you really want to see is that they have trunk rotation. So they're not just turning their whole body to reach to this side. They're actually keeping their legs straight and they're twisting to reach. And something you might see is what's called midline inhibition. And this is where they go to cross and they stop. It's almost like their brain is buffering and then they can cross. So if you're seeing that inhibition, it means they're not yet proficient at this skill, and those pathways still need to be strengthened. So think about that as you're working with them and try and challenge that. So mine turned out really sticky, so I'm just going to add some more flour to it, which is a good thing to mention when we're making Play-Doh. We can make it as soft and as hard as possible. And sometimes I'll make my Play-Doh harder if I want to work on hand strength, because it's harder for them to roll and manipulate. And if I'm working on hand strength, that's a great thing to have. So I'm going to stand up for this. And mine is still really sticky. And this is actually really fun for the kids, and it's working on sensory processing. So you might have some sensory seekers who really want to experience this kind of tactile, gooey, gushy kind of feel. And then you might have kids who hate this feeling. And it's great to work with both of those kids on this, because for the seeker, it provides them that input they want. And for the avoider, it helps them process that sensory experience they don't like and build a tolerance towards it. So my Play-Doh kind of has a better consistency now. But it's still quite soft, so I'm going to add more flour. And that's the great thing about making Play-Doh, is it's very forgiving. It's not overly complicated. So I have my Play-Doh now, which is great. And then what I would encourage you guys to do is work on some fine motor skills and some bilateral skills. So what I'll typically do is I'll pull this into 2 pieces. I'll give them a piece and me a piece, and I'll ask them to copy what I'm doing. So when they're copying what I'm doing, they're working on their visual motor integration. So taking the visual information and then creating a motor plan with that. I'll ask them to rip it apart, and then I ask them to make a ball in between their hands. And this is working on that bilateral coordination again. And then you can work on some more fine motor things, like rolling it into a snake, which you'll see is really challenging for kids. Ripping it apart, you're working on that pinch grip, which is great. And then smushing it all back together, working on strength. And then I like to do something where I ask them to flatten it out on the table. And I ask them to isolate their fingers. So this finger, then this finger, then this finger, and their pinky. And you'll see for kids that that is actually really challenging. And even for me, it's really challenging on my left hand. So that's a great activity to do with them too. Something that I work on a lot with. And then another thing I like to do is get them some little kiddo scissors, make yourself a snake, and get them to practice cutting the Play-Doh. And this is a really nice way for them to learn scissor skills because the Play-Doh gives them a little more feedback so that they can really feel the scissors in their hand and feel the scissors as they cut through a Play-Doh. So it's actually easier than cutting paper, which is really nice. Let's see, let's make sure I'm covering everything. Oh, and then another thing I like to do is, again, put it in that flat, get them to smush it flat. And then with their finger, you can practice some writing skills. So maybe make a smiley face in your Play-Doh, which I realize you guys can't really see, but you can believe I'm doing it. Or work on some of your pre-printing shapes, which is a really important thing to focus on in pre-K years. So these are the pre-printing shapes. And I realize that looks backwards for you guys in the camera, but you just have a vertical line, a horizontal line, circle, a cross, square, diagonals, X, and then a triangle. And these are all the shapes that children need to be able to create and be proficient with before they can do letters. So if they can't do these shapes, if they can't write these with their finger, with a pencil, etc., they're not going to be very successful with printing letters. So under here, I've just written that a vertical line, typically 2-year-olds can do. Then at 2.5, they can do a horizontal. At 3 years old, they should be able to do a circle. At 3 to 4 years, they can start to do a cross. 4 years can do a square. 4.5 can do diagonals. And remember, just because they can do one diagonal doesn't mean they can do the other. It's a separate skill. And then at 5, they can make an X. And at about 5.5, 6 years old, they can make a triangle, typically. So with Play-Doh, try and build these, try and write these in the Play-Doh and see where your kid is kind of on this continuum and how close they are to being able to print. So that's basically all I have for making Play-Doh. Yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed and learned something. Again, I work for all of the Clearview schools, so I look forward to seeing all of your kiddos this next school year in pre-K.